So I'll go ahead and start recording. So you will have to create a shared folder and set permissions, probably create some user accounts and stuff for the skills part of this class. So what tool would you go to create users? First question is, what tool do you create users? By hand, not the PowerShell way. Active Directory. But there's a whole bunch of Active Directories. All right, good. So Active Directory users and computers. Let's go and create an organizational unit for example. Let's create some users in here. I'll create somebody called Biden. We'll create somebody in here called Harris. Just random names. And we'll create another one, Hunter. Not even going to give them first and last names. So go ahead and create 3 user accounts. With just our standard password. You also notice I checked user can't change password and password never expires, just for lab purposes. And yeah, if you didn't click that, you can fix it by going to the Account tab and fixing the checkboxes. Also recording this so y'all can watch it later for practice. So creating user accounts is not too hard. Just new user and username, password, click some checkboxes, and it's created. So next thing we want to create and group these people up. So let's create some groups. Groups are pretty easy to deal with. There's an icon. There's also right-click new group. We're going to put them inside the example OU. Keep them together. And with groups, I like to use the same naming convention that Microsoft uses with naming conventions. Domain local groups are just a name, typically plural with an S on the end. Global groups are typically have the word domain in front of it, followed by a descriptive word And universal typically have the word enterprise in front of it, followed by a descriptive word. With groups, the main group you always deal with for medium and small domains is just global groups. So as far as what your level is right now, just don't use domain, local, or universal groups. Universal groups will come into play if you have multiple domains set up. And same thing with domain, local, normally only really comes into play with multiple domain setups. So global groups, its main purpose is to group users together and then assign permissions to the group and rights to the group. So I'm going to use domain as the beginning of it. And I'm just going to make up CEO, domain CEO. So chief executive officer or officers. Hit OK. And I'll create another group. We'll just name them same thing, global group. Not going to touch anything here. The group type, you only ever really deal with security. There's a distribution group if you're dealing with Exchange server, which is an email server that Microsoft produces. And you really typically don't deal with distribution groups here in Active Directory. The distribution, you would normally utilize that through the Exchange server's administrative portal. So this shouldn't even really be an option in here for it to ever mess with. So you don't want to deal with distribution. It's for grouping people for email address list. It's not a point in you messing with it, especially on this interface. There's better interfaces for messing with that. So we're going to do domain worker. So I have CEOs and we have workers. So creating groups isn't too hard. Just some best practice. How are you going to name them? And what type of groups are you going to create? So you notice they didn't have to make any changes to the radio button because that's Microsoft had them pre-selected what most people are going to use. And that's a global group and a global security group. So I didn't have to make any of those changes. Again, that would be a standard single domain setup for small, medium businesses, things that you would get into. So multi-domain environments, you go work for Disney that owns 100 other companies, has 100 different domains, and you got to make everything all linked together and share information. You are going to need enterprise, the universal groups. But you're not in your server one. You can only find that in server one. So you got to start your server one up out of Hyper-V and close that window completely out. You don't need to be in that at all. There you go. Okay, now you can go and start up your server manager in there and launch all the tools. Right, so with those users and groups created, These groups are empty. Have we put anybody in groups yet? I don't think so. So groups is going to be something new that we've not done yet. But it should be kind of self-explanatory. You create a group and you add people to it. So those people would get whatever rights you assign to that group. And that's the main purpose. Makes things easy. You don't want to assign rights to single individual users because sometimes they get fired. Or retire. Or just get old and die. All kind of stuff happens. So you don't want to assign permissions to user accounts. You want to assign them to groups. That way, if somebody's or additional people are hired in, you can just quickly add them to the group. And if the group's already assigned permission to resources, well, they get access to all those resources instantly. So maybe they needed access to some printers, some file shares, maybe a secure website internally. You could apply permissions to one group. Like I said, a fifth person comes in and joins the team. You just create the user accounts and add them to the group, and all of a sudden he's got rights to the printers and the shares and web page and everything just by one click by adding them to the group. Let's go and add Harris and Biden to the CEO group. There's lots of ways to add users to groups. And the easiest way that I would see to be able to add things to the group, my preferred method is to highlight them using either my control key to select multiples and then right click and tell it to add to group. So that's one method, and I think the best method. You could open up a group and go to members and add them one at a time, searching for each one at a time and building in the list. But I find that's a little bit more complex. I find it's easier just to visually look at them, and if I have to click them out of order, the control key allows you to individually select stuff. But I was going to add in Biden and Harris. We're going to add to group, and then just one neat thing about naming everything domain, you can just simply type domain and check name and give you all the global groups that you've created and all the ones Microsoft's built in. So you can easily click. We want to add them to the CEO group. Successful. Check your CEO group and make sure the members tab includes those users. Okay, so both of those users show up inside the members tab of that group. You've done well. Let's look at another way. Double click your user, double click your Biden user. You'll notice there's a member of tab. And if you click the member of tab, this is another way you can add groups to user accounts. So I see that they are a member of the CEO. Okay. Now we have a group called worker. And that's we're going to say is workers at the facility. And you know the difference between a CEO and a worker, right? CEO is higher up the chain, correct? Well, sometimes they should have more access to stuff. Actually, the CEO is probably an old guy that doesn't know anything about technology, so he should probably have less access than most people. But we're going to pretend like the CEO is supposed to have the most access, and workers are supposed to have lower access to resources. Okay. So a scenario you may run into, you might create a folder that workers need access to, and you're thinking, okay, you only assign workers rights to that folder. You may forget that the CEOs might need to see everything at the company. In that type of scenario, you want to always make sure that the CEO always sees at least the minimum privileges that the lower level employees see. I could add the CEO group inside of workers. That automatically give CEO rights to whatever workers also had rights to. Might be a little confusing there, but let's see if I draw this out. Well, let's go ahead and do the membership first. Let's go ahead and click on Hunter and Domain CEO, and let's add them to the Domain Workers group. So Domain Worker has the user Hunter, and it also has Domain CEO inside of it. Let me graphically draw that. Let's look at the tool here. So if you have this little folder, there you go. That's a manila folder. It's red, but we'll call it a manila folder. Shared folder like you see in File Explorer. So if you give workers right here, read-only access, which is actually read and execute access to that folder, and you forget to give the CEO group rights to that folder, then you might get in trouble from the CEO. But what did we do? We put Hunter as a member of that group. And what did we do with the CEO group? We also added it into worker group. So right now we only gave workers access to that folder, but so that gives Hunter read rights to it. We gave Domain CEO group read rights to it. And who's a member of Domain CEO? Biden and Harris. If we're not colorblind, we'll do blue. So these users are a member of that group. And if it's a member of here, they get read write. Kind of see how you nested. That's about as deep nesting as I'd want to do with the group. You can do more nesting than that, but it gets so confusing. This is about as complex layer of confusion as you want, especially in security. You just don't want to mess up security and inadvertently give somebody too much access. Here in the, well, if you watch the security feeds and stuff, bleeping computer and stuff, you're always seeing somebody's stealing credentials or has access to stuff that they shouldn't have. Cybersecurity, think. So that's how we have our setup. And again, Domain CEO, we have another manila folder out here. And if we give the CEO read and write access to that folder, if that's the only group assigned to this folder, well, Domain Workers not been assigned rights to it, so they don't have access. And Hunter up here is a member of that, and he wasn't assigned, so he has no access. The only people that actually have access would be these two, because they are a member of that group. So they have read and write access to the folder. Neat, security. And it just takes some time to sit down and play and create these shares and add permission and test out, log into the different users and see to actually start to get a good grasp of it. You've got to come up with your own little scenarios and go, well, I'm going to make a folder for videos, a folder for, it used to be real popular, MP3 music. Everybody just streams stuff now. So. Okay, neat. Let's create a shared folder. And let's look at rules. So we want to create a share. Name of the share will be budget. The permissions that a manager might write down and map the share to a drive letter. We could actually just use B. Nobody has floppy disk in their system anymore, so B drive would actually work. You could map the drive letter B. So you might get something like that and think, okay, cool. How do I do this? So early in this semester, we created a couple of shared folders. We created deployed, the $. We also created public. We didn't look too much about permissions on the thing. The only permission we really looked at was the share permission. I told you to take a picture of it because that's always the answer on the share tab. But we've added some more permissions in here for the workers. Not works, workers. Workers get read only and CEO gets read, write, and delete. So where would you go? Yep. Inside of Server Manager, you would click on File and Storage Services, and then click on Shares to create a new shared folder. And there are other ways to create shared folders, but Server Manager is one of your best tools for creating a share. Even with the new web interface administrative tool, I still believe Server Manager gives you more options than any of the others. So inside of Server Manager, you just go ahead and create a new share. And pretty much you're always just going to do the quick share at the top. Now, what do I do? Server 3. Why? Server 1 and 2 is a domain controller. I told you, never put anything on the domain controller. Good, you remembered. There's another question that's asking me. Select a volume. What should I select? The what? No. C is the system volume. You should try to avoid putting anything other than Windows, Microsoft software on C drive. This is a shared folder that the boss and stuff are going to be putting data on. You should avoid putting it on a system drive on a server. So yeah, I would select E drive. We selected a member server, and we selected a volume that does not contain Windows operating system files. That's your best practice. Easier for backups, easier for security, disaster recovery, to keep things separated out. The share name, we said budget. And this is why I like Server Manager. It automatically creates the physical path for where that share is going to be at. On the next screen, it will allow us to change some settings. I always move the checkbox down to encrypt. It's a policy of most companies now that data in motion needs to be encrypted. So any data going across the wire should be encrypted. This here will follow that best practice or that federal or European policy or whatever, that when you're sending data, you must have it encrypted to stop any eavesdropping or any type of injection of bad code into the data. So encrypting it helps protect data. We'll go next. Permissions. We definitely want something different than the default here, because we had specified that workers is read only. CEO needs read, write, and execute, read, write, and delete, at least to the thing. So I'm going to click change or customize permission here. And now I need to decipher what do I do with that was told to me. Principles of least privilege should come into play here. And it doesn't say that everybody at the company should have access. So I need to take something off of here. Users is also very common to everyone. So either one of those, there's three things you can think about. You can think about authenticated users. You can think about everyone and users. All three of those are basically the same thing with security and access to files. So if you see authenticated user group, if you see the everyone group or you see the users group, that's basically everybody in the domain. And our instructions did not say everybody anywhere in the instructions that they need rights to see that. It only said, hey, workers need read to it. I mean, say everybody. So we want to take away these two entries, but I can't. I think we did this before. What do we do? You remember? Disabled inheritance. And then what did we click? Convert. Yep, convert into explicit. Correct. That allows us the ability to remove. So I'm going to take both of those users away. Okay, well, that helps. We've increased security. We took everybody off the system from having rights to it. I also told you those three should probably always stay there. The administrators group, the operating system itself, and creator owner, you normally want to leave those intact. If you take away one of those, you get some odd results typically. So leaving those intact but taking away users is very common. And at this point in time, adding the people that need access to this. And in our case, the workers and the CEO. So we'll add in, and you don't add user accounts. You always want to make sure they're in a group. Even if you're working for a school district and you have a principal, you don't just put the principal's username and give him rights to something. You actually create a group for the principal and only have him in there, because parents, school board may run him off, who knows when. You may find a better job at another school district. And then now what are you going to do? You set up all your permissions based off of his user account and he quit. So don't do that. Put him in a group. All you got to do is swap out the user account that's in that group. The new principal comes in, he's got rights to everything that the old principal had. It's based on the group, not the user account. So let's add in domain workers, or worker. Domain worker. They get read-only. So here's a really common mistake. You do that. There, that's read-only. Now, read doesn't actually say read-only. I will say it just says read. Read-only is what most people will visually say or write down. In Microsoft permissions, NTFS permissions, read-only is the 3 checkboxes here to be able to list the folder contents, which means be able to see file names. And if it's an executable, to be able to run the program. And then read DOS attributes and stuff to be on it. There's all of these 3 checkboxes gives you full read-only rights. Because if you uncheck list folder contents, you could get into the point of you can't see the file name. So how are you supposed to read the file if you can't see the file name? You could get into it as that. Let's go ahead and read and execute list folder contents and read. We'll click OK. That is the actual read-only. Most people need to run programs out of a folder. Let's see. Can't be found. Domain work. Did you create domain worker? In Active Directory? Users and computers? I don't think you created your example organizational unit, or yeah, so you're not going to find it until you create that group. You even got to create the organizational unit. So click on Contoso and up there. And you'll have to create the organizational unit. To be able to see that. So I'm going to go on here so we can, so the video is not too choppy that I'm making. And you can go back and watch the beginning too. Let's see. Next phase, the CEO needs read, write, and delete. So let's add in for domain CEO. No, I don't see delete up here. I do see write. So probably I need to check that, but just correct. But how do I know if he's got delete rights? I could come in and show advanced permissions and look for the word delete. But I don't really have to do that. It's delete is right here in front of you. Modify. This brings me to a movie, Stephen King, from a Stephen King book, The Stand. And Daubert played on Coach way back in the day. That nobody probably knows what I'm talking about. Always plays the dumb guy. He's actually a brilliant person, but I hear actors that play mentally challenged people are normally some of the brightest ones out there. But he goes along, no matter what, he spells M-O-O-N for moon. It doesn't matter if it's like orange, M-O-O-N, spells orange. So always, that goes through my head as I see that actor going M-O-D-I-F-Y or M-O-O-N, spells modify. Something like that with delete, you know. M-O-D-I-F-Y spells delete. That's what goes to my head. And I just see that actor. It's like, yeah, because he spelled, everything was M-O-O-N that he spelled. So in our case, M-O-D-I-F-Y spells delete. So if you've never seen The Stand, you should watch that clip. I may even show that clip in a little bit. I'll not record it, but we'll hit OK here. So the main workers have read, and the domain CEOs, they have modify rights to it. Almost done. Almost done. The share permissions are not correct. What I'd tell you was always the answer for share permissions. This is what trips up so many people for a while. Everyone doesn't need full control. They need change. Most instances, they need change. It implements something called mandatory access control. Full control implements something called discretionary access control, means the creator owner of a file can change the permissions on the file. Mandatory access control means the creator of the file can't change permissions on it. It's preset. So most businesses want mandatory access control. They don't want the end users, because they're not IT staff, to understand the ramifications of changing permissions. They don't want them to be able to have that rights. So putting everyone to change is just implementing a specific access control method under the cybersecurity aspect. So when you take introduction to computer security and stuff, they'll cover role-based, discretionary, and mandatory access control based in there. So this covers two of the different type of access control, like what accesses people get to the network or to a device. So that's what that does. Take off full control, allow change. They can do basically everything except for mess with permissions. They can do everything but change permissions if you give them change rights. It doesn't sound right, does it? Sounds weird. Give them change rights so they can't change permission. Huh? That's bothered me on Microsoft's wording, but that's what it is. We'll add in administrators because you're an administrator, but we have to change the location. Since it's on server 3, you can only find administrators on server 3. We're not on a domain controller, so you have to pick the computer to find administrators. Plural with an S. You know you've got it right when you click, you give them full control, and when you click OK, if you see the double faces there, you know you've done it right. If you see a single face there, you know you've got the wrong group. You should never see a single user. So remember I told you a single user is bad, like the principal scenario. You add the principal to all these files and folders permissions, and then he leaves. Great. If you created a group and gave the group all those rights to the files and folders, then you just put the new principal into that group, and bam, he's got rights to hundreds of files and folders. Permissions already signed over the years too. So that's why I should always see the double faces there, not a single. Here's what is wrong. I misspelled that. No, I didn't. This took a while. I know I've instantly done something wrong. There's a single face showing up in a permission field here, especially on share. So I'm gonna remove that. That's how I know that I was setting it wrong. Okay, that's always your share permissions. Administrators get full control, everyone gets change. Anything other than that, you will get weird results. You typically will have problems if you don't set the permissions like that every time on share. If I try to add CEO in here, if I try to add workers in here, if I try to do anything like that, normally you have some very weird results show up. Results that you don't want. This is like the parking lot of your business. Anything other than that would prevent certain people from driving and parking into your parking lot, which would totally prevent them from going into your store. So yes, always set it like that. It's kind of like the comedy club. Anybody can park in the parking lot, and then the bouncer at the door will stamp you if you're 21 that you can buy alcohol, or not stamp you that you can't buy alcohol when you're inside. So it's kind of like CEO versus workers. They get two different permissions. That's all done over here. This is kind of like the bouncer at the door of a club or something. Share permissions or the parking lot. Don't screw with your parking lot. Let everybody come in and park there. So that's what I said. Trying to block people at that point screws everything up. So we'll hit OK. And next and create. Great, budget is there. The last little thing, I want to map a drive letter to B for those users. I'll do that with group policy. We've not done that yet. This is something new that we've not done. We've disabled inheritance. We've messed with permissions before. We've set share permissions. So all of that we've done before. Creating user accounts we've done, not groups. So groups was something new that will be on the skills final. But mapping a shared to drive letter B, because end users normally don't know what server something is on. They don't know how to spell stuff. They don't know how to use whack server name, UNC naming convention and stuff. So we need to make it easy for them. And they just go to File Explorer, it's in their face. Well, let's do that. So first I'm going to open up budget, open the share. And I'm going to copy that path. Because I spent 2 weeks troubleshooting a map network drive, not mapping because I typed it wrong. Well, I didn't misspell anything. I just put a backslash when I typed it, and that doesn't work. So I know if I right click and open it and explore, it doesn't put that extra backslash on the end of it, and I can copy and paste it. I know that's spelled right. It took me 2 weeks reading through blogs and troubleshooting. I was like, why doesn't it work? It's being read, but the computer's not mapping the drive. Why not? Because it automatically puts a backslash on there. And if I put a backslash on there, then it puts 2 backslashes on there, and I don't see that, and it doesn't map anything. Just an annoyance that I found. It's a big annoyance if you put a backslash on the end of that. So yeah, copy that. So it does 2 things. Make sure you don't misspell anything. And it also automatically doesn't put a backslash on the end of it. So I copied that. Now let's go to group policy. So these steps aren't very hard, but there's just Like I said, there's some quirks in there. Just a single character blows everything up. Most of y'all are in coding, so you know a single stray character somewhere, your whole application doesn't work. Okay, we created all those people under examples, so those are the only people I want to have that drive letter mapped to. So I create a policy on example. So right click, create a new policy here. Create a GPO, group policy object, in this domain and link it here on this example organizational unit. We'll do this map budget share. So I gave it enough detail in the name that somebody in the future will be able to read what this policy is and know what it's doing. Maybe map B to budget share or something, give it some really good detail. Okay. Now, if the computer is just smart enough to read that and just automatically do it for me, that'd be cool, but it's not. We have to edit this policy and configure that setting. So right click and edit. Okay, so this policy, we got to think. Some critical thinking here. We have user accounts inside of this example OU where we link this policy. Let's look at this policy. We can modify computer settings and we can modify user settings. Which one do you think we need to deal with? Your smile, I hope, is sarcasm. And if not, then you're just like, yeah, it's sarcasm. So critical thinking here, since there's only users in the example, then only the user configuration would mean anything. So I wouldn't want to look under computer configuration because I have no computers here. It's only user accounts. So my setting would have to be under user configuration. It'll expand out preferences, and I'll look under Windows settings. You may have to Google it to find it, but that's where map network drives is. Cool. Wonder what we do here. What would you do? I see somebody's right clicking. It's not a Mac. We have right click, so that's good. Right click. New map drive. That only gives you one option. So not too difficult. The location, you paste in the location. There's only 3 things you change here. That's the location, the label. I normally always give the label the same as the share name. Budget. I made it uppercase just because. And the third thing, you got to specify the drive letter. It cannot be a drive letter that's physically in the system because won't map over a physical connected drive in the computer system. So I couldn't map to C drive because hard drive is going to exist in the Windows 10 computer. And sometimes a D drive exists, maybe from a thumb drive or a optical disk that's in this computer system. Some computer systems have a media reader that read different size SD cards and memory cards, and they will have all the way out to like J on those multi-readers in your system. So you kind of got to watch and think, what do I have in my business and where do I need to start mapping stuff to? Anything past M is normally pretty safe, but you won't map over something that's physically there. not map over something. And A and B, yeah, I know they don't exist anymore. Okay, that's all you ever change. What do you want to always avoid? Whoops, not a 10-minute timer. Red. You don't want to modify action. It should always be on update. Update takes care of everything. If it's not there, it creates it. If something needs change, it updates it. You don't need to mess with that. You also don't need to mess really with, very rarely would you need to connect as something else. So 1, 2, 3. Should have wrote those in green, but those are the 3 that 99.9% of the time is what you're always going to need to change. I don't see any other options up there we'd ever need to make a modification for mapping a drive. So that'll be part of the video. And for some reason, this confuses people on the skills final. They tried to change the action to something different. Like, don't even look under there. You don't need to create, you don't need to replace, you don't need to delete. Just update. It takes care of almost all of it. So leave it alone. Just these 3 blocks. Okay. It's mapped. Cool. Now, if I was doing the skills final, I would log into my Windows 10 machine as one of those users and see if it worked. We have different permissions. Hunter should be able to read stuff. Biden should be able to write stuff. So let's go with Biden first. So go to your Windows 10. No, cap lock's on. Still on? There we go. We have some practice labs to do before then too. Okay, so as I log in, I'll check my File Explorer. And I'll check if I have a drive mapped to B. So I do have to click on this PC to look at all of my drive letters. And I do have a drive mapped to B. And I see budget out beside it. That's what the label does. When we map the drive and it said label, and I type budget, if I didn't put a label, it would have like whack whack server ... And they would all show stuff like that. And users would be kind of confused on what's there. So putting a label and having budget, and they're like, oh, that's the budget folder. Users will relate to that better than seeing a UNC drive path up there. And it's normally truncated, so they wouldn't see the whole path. And they got to make the network end user friendly as possible. You're an IT person, don't make it IT friendly. Make it end user friendly. Cool, can I create a file? can. Oh, why is it not typing anymore? Whatever. There you go. That's how much money they want. Sure. So that works. Hunter is supposed to have read only. So let's go log in as the Hunter user. This has nothing to do with politics. I didn't put first and last names, so you don't know who I'm talking about. And I'm not talking bad about these imaginary people anyway. So. Checking the same thing. Hunter should have the drive letter mapped. Can files be created? No. Can files be changed? No. Can files be deleted? No. Good. It works. So all of those steps would be in the final lab portion of this. And then I said we have another final with automating with PowerShell at the very end of December.